Refer to the list of guidelines. Which one of these is the easiest for you to achieve, and which one is the hardest?
Among the guidelines, the easiest for me would be the use of diagrams. I'm a science teacher, so we use diagrams all the time. The hardest thing for me is give learners control over pacing and manage cognitive load when pacing must be instructionally controlled. I'm so sorry. Instructionally controlled. I see them during 45 to 55 minutes. So it's really hard for me to keep silence and not interfering with their work. I try to carefully choose my interventions, but it's often hard as I only see them once or twice a week and I have to move on.
The guideline I would find the easiest to work with would be the one that refers to the redundancy effect in terms of reducing redundant content in materials. I think that it's something that we can probably do better at, but by being more aware of that impact on working memory of that extra content and the additional information that's not necessarily needed, I think that can be really powerful. So I think that's something that's quite easy to do, but has a really big impact. So that's worth having a go at. In terms of the hardest one to do, I agree with Nicholas that it probably comes down to the one where they talk about allowing students to guide the pacing of the content to support their own cognitive load. I think that's really tricky, particularly in this example that's around test design. And with our limited time that we do have with students, with every student at a different level, it's really hard to allow that self-pacing. So that's something that needs to be considered.
Okay, there are two that I think were reasonably good and reasonably easy that I'm doing is the explain with diagrams and words and presenting the explanations with an audio backup. Again, that modality effect is kicking in there. We've got the visual, the audio, and also because it's embedded there with the notes and the video there. The second one was paring down the content. Stop talking about extraneous material, the redundant material, and focus on what I'm presenting in that space at that time. So they're two that I've done some focus on and worked hard at this year. The one that's aspirational is the one there. Let me just have a check here. Number 16, learners' control over pacing. I think that's just something that's I've got to learn to let go of a little bit there and just stop being logjam. If the students are mastering the work, let them go ahead without having to just sort of corral them back into the general space. So that's aspirational. That's something, it just makes my classroom messy. I just got to learn to deal with that.
Okay, so as far as the guidelines go, one of the easiest, I think, and it's already present in my practice, is the using performance aids. So again, the luxury of having just one space to teach in. I've embedded performance aids and been able to individualise it for particular students so that they are always there to aid and assist external memory. One of the hardest, I think, is that the whole idea, as opposed to just one, but the whole idea of what can assist a novice can hurt an expert. And so there's such a large range of abilities and knowledge by the time students come to Year 6 that distinguishing my novices from my experts across so many different subject areas and being able to design learning experiences considering cognitive load for both.
One of the guidelines I think I do quite well is giving students control over the pacing of their learning, number 16. This year I've trialled something in literacy where I give my students all their reading activities for the week at the beginning of the week, and they can choose how and when they complete the activities, so long as they still are accountable at the end of the week. And that seems to be working quite well, and the students certainly are more engaged. Something I can work on, just like some others, paring down the content to the essentials, eliminating the redundant but related technical content for text economy.
Okay, so for me, I'm super impressed that everyone's talking about allowing students to have their own kind of sequencing and their own pacing. That's super impressive. Probably a long way away from that, though, I must be honest. For me, the hardest would be number 9, eliminate extraneous visuals, texts, and audio. Obviously, making flip videos and presentations, the temptation is always to kind of use design principles to make it, pretty and appropriate. What I'm probably going to be working on over the holidays is sort of looking into the concepts of multimedia design, user interface and user UX, to actually think about the way that I'm producing content for students and how accessible it is, and how I can trim it back essentially and stop showing off and rather give them the information they need in a clean and crisp way. For me, the easiest would be 17, which is replace some problems with worked examples. That's something I've really made a focus, and it's been really successful.
So in terms of the guidelines application to testing, we do quite a lot already, mainly to advocate for those students who may not be able to access the test as easy as others. So we do quite a lot of, giving special provisions to explain diagrams, using cues and signals. That's a really big one at the moment, particularly with the QCAA new syllabus and the assessment modules. Integrating explanatory text, paring down content to essentials. We've really pushed that, eliminating extraneous visuals and text and audio, and eliminating the redundancy effect really well. I guess it's now a case of using those strategies to enhance my classroom teaching, and some of them I really liked. I'm a maths teacher, so providing worked examples that are already there and narrating through them, I really like that, for flip videos as well. So really I have to read through those and see what I can apply in class.
Okay. I think I've attempted some of these guidelines in some form, but not like consciously, so probably they haven't been done as well as they probably should be. The hardest is considering cognitive overload for a whole task, especially if you're unsure with it yourself as a teacher. So a good example is that the PSMTs, the new assessment style in mathematics in Queensland. So that has been an interesting learning curve, and I think the kids have struggled with it because we've struggled with it. Also, I think my inexperience has allowed for overestimating the capabilities of my students and therefore hitting that cognitive load earlier than I expect. Whoops, sorry. The easiest stuff is, considering your PowerPoints, and with those minimal words, text economy, and pictures that relate. I do feel like I'm a bit cheeky though, and I put some novelty stuff in there, which makes me wonder about extraneous load. Sorry.
Okay, so according to the guidelines, which is easiest for me to achieve and which is the hardest? I probably, rather than what's the hardest, because I think they're all actually achievable, but which one do I actually need to do more of is probably the angle I'll take. As far as the easiest, it's probably number 4 and number 5 that I do and I have done without actually knowing anything about cognitive load theory. So explain diagrams with words presented in audio narration and use cues to signal to focus attention to important visual textual content. So I'm a big PowerPoint user, so that sort of is part and parcel of what I do. So I do those with relative ease. What do I need to do more of, or what has been brought to my attention as a result of learning about cognitive load theory is probably number 15, and that is consider the risks of cognitive overload before designing whole task learning environments. And so I think now that I have this understanding in my head, that's what I will be focusing on for next year. Thanks.
I think something that I do well is the explaining diagrams with words, as well as using cues and signals to focus when I'm going through those explanations in the textual content. So like putting words in bold and stuff like that in my notes to highlight that that's what I want the students to be looking at. Something that is going to be a bit of a challenge is the eliminating redundancy in content delivery modes. And I think this is a challenge because of something that Angela brought up before, is that something that's necessary for lower ability students is they're redundant or extraneous for higher ability students. So when you're trying to make a resource like a video that's caters for both of those ends, you've kind of got to have all that extra stuff in there so that it's accessible to the those different levels of entry.
Okay, so in reflecting on those guidelines, I'm going to start with the hardest for me would be, and I'll just put it out there, would be use directive rather than guided discovery learning designs for novice learners, because when you're dealing with young children, and I'm thinking of the K-2 area, that a lot of them are novice learners in the many different areas, and there are times when direction is needed and there's time when they do need the opportunity to have discovery learning in the sense of whether it be play-based or whether it be inquiry or investigations or reading. They need that opportunity. The easiest would be using number 5, which was using cues and signals to focus their attention to important visual and textual content within texts for students.
Yeah, with regards to the guidelines, I think the easiest one to achieve for me would be to use cues and signals to focus attention to important visual and textual content. I think that's probably the easiest, especially in maths. You can sort of do that, and even sometimes in science, really highlight those key points. I think the difficult one would be, or the hardest, would probably be 9 and sort of 10. It's where you're eliminating things. Now, I've probably, in some cases, done that for, if you've got, like, say, a PowerPoint, trying to limit what's there. But I think just a habit sometimes it means you put things in, extra things in that you don't need. And in 10, it's eliminating that redundancy in content delivery modes. I think that's probably one where you get used to doing a particular way and give you multiple options and stuff like that, and sometimes it's just simple is better.
I'm going to start with a hard thing in case I run out of time. Mine is number 15. Consider the risks of cognitive overload before designing whole task learning environments. And I'm aware of cognitive overload, and students from year to year go up and the teacher goes, oh my goodness, I don't know anything, because at my school currently things are taught in isolation. They're taught maths and then they're taught English, and this is in a primary school environment. And knowing so much about inquiry and how links can be made, I would like to be doing that, but teaching at a school that doesn't have this offered can be really difficult. So that's a hard one for me. And then an easy one is to have the performance aids to support students visually. Being in a primary school classroom, that's something that I can have up and do well.